Welcome to the Learning to Die podcast.
I'm Ian Doonican.
And I'm Kieran O'Regan.
How do I live when I know I must die?
We explore areas of philosophy, psychology, martial arts, culture, existential risk, history, society, religion, science, and anything else that seems of interest and relevance to answering that question.
We can only hope that some of what we learn might be of benefit to you too. Namaste, sapiens. Welcome back to the Learning to Die podcast. Today we are going to follow on from our last conversation, which was about nuclear near misses. I suppose, Kieran, we started off with Hiroshima part 1, which then part 2 really wasn't part 2. It was like nuclear near misses, and this is nuclear near misses continued. So we might be a bit discombobulated with our numbers. So if you're listening to this is a follow-on or a thread from Hiroshima 1, nuclear near misses, and nuclear near misses 2. I think we might call this one, I'm not sure. But we, last week, Kieran brought us on a bit of a journey with our friend who basically...
Vasily Arkhipov.
Yeah, Arkhipov. And, like I said, Kieran, in every episode, I love quoting a few lyrics. And the song, if I was to write a song that actually, I suppose depicted Archipov's life, it would be the song. I don't know if it was Eurythmics or Annie Lennon. I think it was Annie Lennox. And the song was called I Saved the World Today by Annie. Oh, it was actually Eurythmics. Yeah, it wasn't Annie Lennox, it was Eurythmics. And the lyrics are, hey, I saved the world today. Everybody's happy now. The bad things gone away. And everybody's happy now. The good things here to stay. Please let it stay. So if I was to write a song about that, man, hey, I saved the world today. Put that in the show notes as well, I'd like. Have a listen to that. Because, man, he did save the world that day. That was a crazy story last week. I was thinking about that for days afterwards.
Yeah. And those quotes that I have above it here, where it's like Arthur Schlesinger Jr., who is a Kennedy aide and Pulitzer Prize winning historian. And there's the quote here, he said, "This was not only the most dangerous moment of the Cold War, it was the most dangerous moment in human history." That's savage, a fucking quote. Yeah.
Absolutely savage. So there was another lad as well, wasn't there? You had.
Yeah, Max Tegmark is. So there's another quote here by Max Tegmark, the MIT physicist and one of the founders of the Future of Life Institute, which is an organization focused on existential risk and continuing the human race, essentially, species, and all life on Earth. He said, this is when 2017. I want to reiterate this because it's so key. Is that this is of Arkhipov. He has, in my opinion, made the greatest positive contribution to humanity of any human in modern history. So Max Tegmark said that in an interview with Lex Friedman. So I'd stitched together, to write that piece in the previous essay, I'd stitched together details from a Boston Globe article, a Guardian article, a Future of Life article, Lex Friedman podcast with Max Tegmark and a number of other sources to stitch together that kind of coherent story on what happened that day. But it's such a mad situation to realize that humanity just about escaped disaster because of the cool head of one man.
Bonkers to think about. It's fucking absolute bonkers.
Yeah. Who, especially to make it even yet more bonkers, is that he was a lad that you'd never heard of before that, and up to maybe last year at some point, maybe the year before last, I'd never heard about. So like, this is a guy who humanity owes its existence to that one dude, yet none of us heard of him because of his ability to stay calm. And I can't help but think it's because he was Russian, and it's not in the West's interest to highlight a Russian hero, because of the Cold War legacy, etc.
But also as well, Karen, how many people do we know who are true heroes in this world? that they're suppressed or their story is hidden or buried or whatever. I think a lot of like what we live in is a world full of propaganda and, you know, fucking smoke and mirrors and the people who are not really doing the work. You know, what really kind of got me skeptical to the whole thing was when Barack Obama got the Nobel Peace Prize. What for sending people to war? Like, come on, like,
and droning people, droning people.
Now, I don't know if this is true, but seemingly more people died under Barack Obama than did under Bush.
Yeah, well, they had the most. They ended up just going off the fucking rails at drone strikes.
Yeah.
You know, that was a big part of Barack Obama's legacy, is overseeing, I can't remember what the stats were, but an unbelievable amount of deaths due to drone strike. And but there's a line, there's that, maybe you could find it there, would you? Like the Orwell line about controlling, if you control the past, if you control the past, you control the present. If you control the present, you control the future, or something like that. What's that line by Orwell? It's about basically controlling narratives and being able to control the story that people are told.
Quote by George Orwell: "Who controls the past controls the future."
Yeah.
Who controls the past controls the future. Quote meaning George Orwell's famous quote comes from his justifiably famous science fiction novel, which is turned into a reality these days, 1984. Who controls the past is a quote from 1984. The novel describes this was the future. Orwell was writing when information was being controlled by a minority of people, and his novel contains references to Nazi Germany. The quote still reminds us that it is important to identify the source of information we receive. Yeah.
And Stalinist Russia as well, though.
Yeah, the quotation in context. In 1984, the dystopian superstate of Oceania, which could be actually, I think that's what people call it down here in Australia, is run by the fictional English Socialist Party known as the Newspeak language of Oceania as INSOG, or INGSOC, INSOC. INSOC is led by a mysterious and perhaps mythical leader known as Big Brother. The protagonist of the novel is Winston Smith, a member of the middle class known as the Outer Party, who lives in London. Winston is the editor of the records department in the Ministry of Truth, where he actively revises historical records to make the past conform to whatever INSOC wants it to be. One day he wakes up and thinks, who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. The mutability of the past is the central tenet of INSOC. Past events, it is argued, have no objective existence but survive only in written records and human memories. The past is whatever the records and the memories agree upon. And since the party in full controls all the records and in equally full control of the minds of its members, it follows that the past is whatever the party chooses to make it.
Yeah. That's what this is what, is definitely concerning about the current situation in loads of ways is how it's going to be twisted narrative wise when elections come up about what happened and everything.
Yeah.
This is what's going to be fascinating about the kind of stories that come out about every country, about every country, about how they dealt with it and how the politicians made a mess of it in reality, but how they're going to try and spin their reactions and then how and whether or not they're going to be able to be held accountable for failures and how they dealt with this situation, the COVID situation, for so many ways. The obvious thing being here in Ireland, which is hilarious, is the cancelling of the Italian rugby match, but then letting all the fans travel. This is in fucking March of 2020. They cancelled the Italian game, Ireland versus Italy in the Six Nations, but then let all the fans travel still to go on the piss in Temple Bar. It's so gas. But yeah. This is another.
Did you? I got a picture to show you. Here's a picture here. This is so when I went to the rugby on Sunday. There was over the loudspeaker, it's a federal offence to go on the pitch and blah 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 because these people are in a quarantine bubble. $50,000 fine, you go to prison. Did you see the picture I sent you last week on the people cleaning the goalposts?
Yeah.
Right. So I've got that one, which I'll show here as well. Let's get this up 1 second, please.
I wonder, is that just unbelievable? Is that just legitimate? So that's either something about the virus that I don't know about, which very well could be the case, or what I understand about the virus transmissibility is correct, and that's absolute insanity what they did. Or they know that it's an utterly worthless and futile endeavor to go in spraying the post the day after the game, but they're doing it anyway just to demonstrate some kind of virtue signaling around.
It's optics.
Safety.
It's pure optics.
Optics. Which
pure
of those
optics,
three?
Yeah.
Just the optics?
It's pure optics, because the research that I've read is that the virus doesn't live on surfaces.
Yeah.
Doesn't live long. Yeah, right. So at the start,
outdoors, sunlight.
Yeah, at the start we thought it did. And then it was like, no, it doesn't. Then it's like with the masks as well. Very low efficacy of the masks. You read the World Health Organization, very, very low. Anyway, this is the this is the picture. This is after the fucking game. Look at that. Now we have no community transmission in Western Australia. And that's what's going on. You'd swear we were living in fucking Chernobyl.
Hazmat suits, like.
Yeah. Out spraying the posts.
This is after the All Blacks game?
No, this is after an AFL game.
Oh.
Because they're going to have the grand final, which would be like, I suppose, in Ireland, having the GEA final is going to happen here in Perth. And it generally happens in Melbourne every year, but we're going to have it here. So we've got like fierce.
You think this is just for optics, that they're literally just doing this to try and show, look how much we care about COVID?
Yeah. But what else can it be? All the players are negative, right? Let's put this in context. There's 60 fucking thousand people can sit in that stadium. 60 fucking thousand, not two, 60,000, right? In this stadium. We have no community transmission in the state of Western Australia. We're 9 times the size of Texas. We have no masks. The only cases we have active are those in hotel quarantine that have come into the country or come in from a different state and are doing their 2-week mandatory quarantine. We have no community transmission. The AFL players that have come in, who are in a quarantine bubble, have all tested negative and get tested every day, I think, or a couple of days, are all negative. And we're still going around doing this, right? Now, yesterday or today, here's another one. This is currently with teams training here in Perth. You've got this guy going around here, wiping down, and him here, kicking around the ball. Like, what the fuck? If he's wearing a mask or she's wearing a mask, why isn't he? If it's that insidious of a virus, does the virus go, oh, no, I'll just get away from him because he's exercising? Like, it's either deadly or it's not deadly. This is all optics. Like, this is fucking bananas, this stuff. I don't even realize that people are looking at this and going, I wonder what people think when they look at that, because I look at that and I think that's a load of fucking shit.
But you'd expect to see that kind of thing in communist China or something, where they're trying to portray a kind of an image of control and stability in trying to maintain an image of, we have all this under control. You can trust us because we're going to mind you.
Yeah.
Please don't rebel. Please don't, we want you to feel like we have everything under control. We're the state. We know what we're doing. Don't worry about it. It's that kind of. So here's you're like, I mean, straight out. Do you think that a hypothetical state leader by the name of Mark might himself dream about eventually, when he dies, that he is brought to a taxidermist and stuffed and put into a glowing red box that people can go and visit in a giant public square?
Well, I don't think he dreams of that, because I think that's actually close to a reality at the moment. And that's not, I don't mean that as a joke. Last week here in this, it was Father's Day here in Australia last week, so the different dates in Ireland. And he's a Labour Party person, and they put up on Facebook or some media channels the ability to sign a digital card to wish him happy Father's Day because he is the state daddy. That ain't fucking funny in my book. And people were like, oh, he's so great. He's so, like, really? Really? And that's okay.
How
All right.
childish is that shit, man?
That's great, you know. And then he received bad comments. It was in the news on Monday, and he laughed it off as a joke. Of course he would. So, you know, long term, I won't be living here. This is too fucking weird. This stuff. This is just weird. Whether you support him or don't support him, what your politics are, or whatever it is, this is just weird. It's gone beyond bizarre. It's just gone weird.
Yeah. But you sent me that, and I was like, this is, yeah. It's like, but it's a cult of personality thing. It's like Chairman Mao or Xi Jinping or whatever, trying to develop a cult of personality around himself.
Yeah.
You know, it's what dictators have always done. Like, it's what.
And people don't see it. It's the embryonic stages of a dictator.
Yeah,
people don't.
It's so fascinating to see play out. But what's really interesting, though, what I find fascinating about these people that want to be dictators and want to feel special, is at the end of the day, they're still going to die. Maybe he'll be old someday and he'll have Alzheimer's and he'll be shitting himself with a nappy on, and that is still going to happen to us. Like, death comes for us all. Yeah. Degradation and decay and entropy comes for us all. Second law of thermodynamics means he's not going to last like any of us. That he's still just a fumbling, fallible, bally ape fumbling around, and that he's realistically just this infant that's afraid of the void he's going to return to, like all the rest of us. And that this is how it's so interesting. We just break it down to like, he can't, no matter how powerful he tries to think of himself or how much he gets, how much of a kick he gets off feeling wanted and trying to get all this power and hoover up self-esteem from trying to feel superior and all this. Like, he's still just a bally monkey that's going to die at some day as well, like just like all the rest of us. It's just so gas how, you know, it's just this. It's just when you see the futility of that kind of way of thinking, it's just like it's hard. It's so hard for me to reconcile that desire for power, because it's just like I keep coming back to viewing things through this Becker lens of just this pathetic way of trying to develop some kind of an immortality project to compensate to the fact that he's going to someday return his carbon to nature as well, and he won't accept it.
Yeah, it's weird, man. Look, I think maybe he thinks he's doing the right thing in some regards, but no one really knew of him before, I think, last year. And then all of a sudden with COVID, I think, like with a lot of politicians, they took the opportunity to score political points and play these godlike complexes. Like, you even look in the States, for example. America's a great one to look at because you got the federal approach to it. And then you had all the states had different approaches to it. And then even within the states, city mayors had different approaches to it. And so it's actually going to be kind of good in the future, I think, in terms of like some clever PhD in epidemiology or, you know, in politics or political science will look at, because you've got all these different kind of case studies you can compare or different approaches to work out what happened, what were the pros and cons of it in terms of social unrest or in the spread of the actual virus, you know?
And not even just social unrest, but iatrogenic effects of optimizing for the control of the virus and looking at things like child abuse, child sex abuse. Because like child sex abuse and domestic abuse went
gone through the roof.
Because a lot of the normal mechanisms that would have been used to catch that stuff, like bruises on a kid in school or a kid's demeanor changing when he's at school and going into his shell after an abusive scenario, those kind of things were taken away for months at a time because schools were closed and people were working from home. So like the amount of physical and emotional, domestic and child abuse went through the roof. And there's that. Look at alcohol-related deaths. Like, it's not to say that there wasn't action shouldn't have been taken for the virus. Of course, like I'm not ignorant to realities of the virus, but at the same time, the hyper focus on one particular thing to try and optimize toward one particular end meant to a disregarding of iatrogenic negative consequences on other aspects of social well-being and public health and child development, on missed hospital appointments, on kicking the can down the road, on scans for cancer, on routine prostate checks, on et cetera, just pile up the fucking list of things that got kicked down the road because of an optimization for one particular element or optimization toward one particular element of public health. So
And then I know some people caring on that topic as well, who maybe are like, I just don't want a vaccine. Like, I just don't want that. I don't care if I die, type of thing. They're even afraid to go to the doctor to get hassled about getting the vaccination. So they're missing out on all that other stuff because they're afraid that the doctor's going to fucking jump down their throat.
Yeah.
You know, it's.
But a lot of, this is what's going to be fascinating to study, if possible to study, which is the focus on, well, okay, what's the point of taking measures at all in a pandemic? Well, it's to assist public health. Okay, but what's public health? Okay, so it's the health of the public. Okay, but what is that? What is the well-being of the public? En masse, what is that? What does that look like? Well, it's not just the virus, it's a load of other things that also. So it's what would be fascinating to look at is like which courses of action helped to best balance the mitigation of the harm from the virus with the as little impact as possible in terms of balance with the other iatrogenic effects that ended up happening, like we discussed, like alcohol addiction, abuse, sex abuse, etc. The economic things that are more long term, like the collapse of businesses and all this kind of stuff. So that'll be to me the most kind of interesting research questions, is looking at what kind of modalities facilitated the best balance between dealing with the virus and also without negatively affecting public health in other ways to the same to as high a degree.
Yeah, I agree. I was actually looking at a table a couple of weeks ago, just seeing if I could see it here as well, because it was a nice way of looking it up by age groups, and maybe I might be able to find it here. I'm not sure. But it was lots of, and it was government data as well. It wasn't something made up by me or somebody else. But it was, I'm just going to see if I can get it here. It was a great table by age group. I should have saved the link. Wait, now, here, maybe I have it here. Oh, yeah. So here's one of, yeah, so like here's one here, right? This is kind of interesting. So first of all, if you look at, this was on influenza deaths. This wasn't the one I was looking for exactly what. This is just interesting too. Influenza deaths, you can see that basically once you get up over 85, well, over 70 here, the numbers get higher and higher. You know, and if we say that like COVID is similar to that, then it obviously goes up. So you can see there in that year, you know, 511, like that's 1,300 deaths in a year for influenza. And we've had about the same in a year and a half for COVID. That's interesting.
But I suppose from a lot of the thing with that, I listened to a very good podcast yesterday, and I've chat to people who either were directly involved in hospitals that were overrun, or emergent, or who have siblings, let's say, or partners or close friends that were in hospitals that were overrun, specifically like in the likes of the UK, and the paradox of, not paradox, but a difficulty in us outside of the health system in countries that were severely affected by the pandemic, like even like the UK, let's say, the NHS, is that for a lot of us, the pandemic was invisible. Like towns went quiet, cities were quiet, businesses shut down, etc. But we didn't see the bodies on the street. Whereas in hospitals, then it's like in some hospitals, it was like an absolute war zone. And there's this kind of reality to the virus where, to most people, unless they themselves had the virus or were infected by it or had a loved one that was lost, so much of the pandemic was a massive inconvenience, obviously, but it was a lot of just like, well, what the fuck even is this? Like, whereas for people who were on front line in hospitals that ended up being overrun by COVID patients because of hospital admissions, it was an actual war zone where they were seeing people dying every day and needing to make choices between people to resuscitate and people to not resuscitate. So there's a really interesting kind of like epistemic barrier to our understanding of the virus if we were outside of the health system, especially a health system that was overrun. And so while this definitely isn't kind of an Ebola scenario that was like some hyper contagious Ebola variant that was wiping out 60% of people or whatever, it's still something that managed to potentially collapse a health system many times all over the world, you know, and to get in the way of hospitals being able to do other procedures. But that's obviously not, there's other reasons for that as well, obviously with lack of funding and poorly managed health systems, etc. And there's less than scenarios, but I'm very slow to totally disregard the actual impact of the virus on people, even though there was still fuckery like in the UK. There was deaths, like the way that they kind of counted COVID deaths was you had a COVID
fucked.
died within 4 weeks. So then if you had a COVID test and then you died 3 weeks later, and a positive COVID test, and then 3 weeks later you died in a motorcycle accident, you were classified as a COVID death, this kind of thing. And that's obviously ridiculous, but it's simultaneously true for that to be ridiculous and for it also for it to be the case that there were hospitals overrun and that they had to make decisions about who to give the ventilator to and let the other person die.
Yeah. But there's an interesting one, Kieran, because then the other thing then is in America, they were saying when they ventilated people were dying. So they stopped ventilating people. So there's the other one, right? And here in Australia, they're saying things like somebody died that was 85 with serious underlying conditions. And so did they die from COVID or with COVID? And again, that's another thing as well. Now, I think what you're saying is exactly right. That doesn't stop the people in hospital. That's like an after effect of it, like oh yeah, they had this, they had that, we control for this. I totally agree with what you're saying. And so there's failures there in terms of our capacity and capability to manage something like this, which we know that from about 10 years ago, loads of governments cut funding and resources for pandemics because like, oh, well, fucking hell, I have not one of those in 100 years, so we'll just chop out all that money. And that's what happened, right? So we know that for a fact. But the other thing as well is I wonder from a timing point of view is we get a flu season that goes for 6 months, for example, over the winter and autumn. Did we just get COVID all in one short period of time? So instead of 6 months, did we just get a big spike of all these people within 2 weeks where generally we would have the capacity in the hospital and the capability to manage that over 6 months where we just got on like in 2 or 3 weeks when we had these waves.
But you also got to think that in that, let's say, for example, that's a typical flu season that you mentioned some stats there. But at the same time, you also have to take into account that but in a typical year, a typical flu season, there aren't travel restrictions in Australia. So that's a typical flu season in a year where people are allowed to travel wherever they want to come in and out of the country, etc.
Correct, yeah.
Whereas obviously in Australia, people, even their own citizens, haven't even been allowed to come home in the last fucking year. And travel is restricted and there has been lockdowns. So let's say if there had been the same restrictions on travel then as there was this year, those flu numbers would be a lot lower. But if there had been the same non-restriction on travel this year as there had been in those previous flu years, who knows how many COVID deaths there would have been, maybe multiples of what those flu numbers were in the same conditions.
And then other countries are saying that unless you get herd immunity, you're not going to get over it. So in other words, we're all going to get hit with this sooner or later, like what's happening in New South Wales. But I just want to
and the idea is to kind of, I suppose, from like a mitigation perspective, because like some family members of mine, like older family members of mine had COVID recently in very high risk categories, like people who are undergoing cancer treatment and are immunocompromised, etc. And but they were vaccinated already and they managed to get COVID. And given the fact that they were in such high risk categories, like in their 70s, late 70s, and immunocompromised, if they hadn't had the vaccine, they're in the prime category to be killed off by the virus, So there's a kind of reality to the herd immunity element where if we're all going to get COVID anyway, then the people who have the vaccine are less likely to be made very ill or hospitalized or killed by the virus when they do get it. But it's not about not getting the virus. It's about being less likely to be killed or hospitalized when you do get it. Is the kind of, from my understanding of the idea of the vaccine, is that the virus isn't going anywhere. And that is because the vaccines aren't perfect. So
yeah, but I think Karen, what happened there originally was when the vaccines came out, is that we had politicians here talking to saying that the vaccines would stop transmission.
Yeah.
We had politicians here saying that. And so we've shown that it's not, you know. So I think that's part of the problem. You got politicians just fucking scoring political points, not using science. And I think that's a classic case of scientism, not using actual scientific method or thinking or medical.
Yeah.
And even then people go, but the health minister is just a fucking politician. Just because they're the health minister doesn't mean they underwent like 7 or 10 years of medical training. They're just a greasy fuck too. So that's what annoys me.
And I think there has to be this awareness as well when it comes to politicians and science and evidence, where all humans have biases and we all have different filters that we view information through. Because I love the line by this that I came across a few years ago, is that we do not see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. So then we all have our own individual filters. So even when it comes to something like evidence-based practice, we're interpreting the evidence through a pre-existing bias lens just by virtue of being an individual that has preferences and has pre-existing preferences. But at the same time, and we have to be especially aware of when it comes to politicians, is that that very often what we see is not evidence-based policy, it's policy selected evidence. It's politicians selecting the evidence, cherry picking the types of evidence that suit the policy they want to implement, not using the overall body of evidence to drive policy. And we see that a lot in politics.
So Kieran, if we come back to our initial point on this, is you were talking about overall public health. If you look at this matrix I just put up, this is the one I wanted to talk about. You see the age groups down here. So under 1 to 14, 15 to 24, 25 to 44, and so on with the age groups. And then the first cause, second cause, third cause, fourth cause, fifth cause. So the first thing I'd like to draw people's attention to, if they're looking on YouTube, is right down here for 85 years and over, the fifth leading cause is influenza and pneumonia. So if the politicians are saying that this is a really bad form of a flu, then this is the least leading cause, to use those words, of death, right? So if it's down there, in the grand scheme of public health, if we want to call this like a public health matrices of a matrix of what kills people. So what I want to know then is, or the questions I have, look at this, Kieran, 15 to 24 and 25 to 44, suicide.
The leading cause.
Suicide. So that's the leading cause, right, of death. So if that's the case, imagine what's been exacerbated from what you just said as well.
These are just in recent years. Like this is
that's right. This is 2017, 2019. Yeah, pre-pandemic numbers. And the other thing, Karen, as well, is I think we've all seen now that the risk factors for COVID, things like obesity and so on, and the other sort of metabolic conditions. Look at all of these ones here that are in the top ones: coronary heart disease, lung cancer.
Obesity is associated with all of those. Like obesity is obviously heart disease, and likes of cancers are exacerbated, if I remember correctly, from obesity. Coronary heart disease, obviously, and then other non-communicable disease like dementia and Alzheimer's can be related to like long-term insulin resistance and systemic inflammation as well.
And sleep apnea derived from obesity. Yeah. So it's pretty interesting when you look at the overall public health. And again, it's not to say that, we should just let people die. I'm not saying that, but I think it comes back to what you're saying, Karen, is how much do you want to optimize or chase one issue to the detriment of everything else? Because it's like we're going to save, let's say if we said the people are really at risk for COVID, which we know are people over 70, right? We know that as we get younger, the risk goes down. Yes, there has been people who have died who are young. I'm not saying that, but it's just the high risk. So if we put these people into like risk buckets, we know these people are really at risk up at this top end, 75, 80, and so on. So potentially, why can't we have our risk mitigation really focus on these people but then also allow these things to be managed for the lower groups.
That's what, there was a thing called the Great Barrington Declaration, and that's the kind of thing that they were suggesting was targeted protection of, and it was signed by like loads of doctors, like Stanford professors and all sorts, but it was really kind of shut down because their idea was targeted protection, the Great Barrington Declaration. It came out late last year, like October or November, and I don't know how to, I saw an interview recently on Unheard with the guy who, on the Unheard podcast YouTube channel, with the guy who, one of the key guys in writing it. And he's a Stanford, if I remember correctly, Stanford professor of medicine. But his ideas were based around, well, not everyone is subject to this to the same degree. So let's have targeted, and there's going to be knock-on effects of treating everyone the same in terms of negative health effects. So let's have targeted protection of the most vulnerable people.
Yep.
And then let's let the less risk you're in, the more you should just go about your life. Because otherwise we're going to end up causing way more negative knock-ons of an unintended consequence by just trying to take a blanket approach to everyone. So like he gave examples like what would have happened in a lot of care homes, where obviously the most vulnerable people are care homes because they're already elderly and comorbidities and indoors in the same fixed place. And he had solutions like, well, how about instead of, because what would have happened is someone gets COVID in a care home and then they're sent to hospital, but then they're sent back to the care home because they don't have room for them in the hospital, or that they want to try and, so then you ended up basically sending infected people back into care homes. Where it becomes where it festers. Or similarly, he gave suggestions like, how about you don't do that? And how about you protect the care homes by creating bubbles where you have the staff, you set up situations where the staff are able to live in bubbles for multiple weeks at a time and be tested upon going in and out of the bubble, so that they live on with the care home or live near it in bubbles away from their own families, so that when they're interacting with the residents in the care homes and the most vulnerable people, that they're less likely to be bringing the virus in with them. But then they go home every few weeks or whatever, and they get tested before coming in and out, and they live in bubbles like these sports teams do. So these are the kind of things that he was talking about, which makes total sense, because what ended up happening was everyone got treated the same, and then the people who were most vulnerable still ended up getting fucked. So a lot of the big spikes and most of the deaths, not most of the deaths, I don't know the actual data, but many of the deaths occurred amongst the people who were most vulnerable because there wasn't special protections put in place for them. There was the odd, like visitors weren't allowed to come in, etc. But that's a really low resolution way of doing it. The staff were still going home in the evening times.
That's happened here, yeah.
Yeah, like sick members were kept in the building rather than brought away. This kind of thing. So it's the lack of willingness to stratify by risk was insane. It seems like, it just seems, obviously I'm not a public health official, but I'm sure that it's a very complex and difficult thing to organize. But the fact that there wasn't a stratification just seems so counterintuitive once you recognize that this isn't an equal opportunities virus.
Yeah, but that's the challenge, is having these discussions. You get shut down. That's the problem. And I think that's the challenge. It's either, everybody or nobody. Anyway, I want to jump back to our nuclear war stories. We went on a tangent there from communist dictators down to COVID to whatever. So can we jump back to your second guy, the second character you had that helped us avoid nuclear devastation?
We figure out here where. So I'll go down as far, and I can see I might have some other sections here that might be worth digging into, but I'll just read the first guy we talked about last week was Vasily Arkhipov, and this is the second fella by the name of Stanislav Petrov.
Kieran, you're not going to believe this. Before we go any further, remember the story I told you before about the bird singing at nighttime?
Yeah.
It's 6:30 here. It's pitch black now outside. He's fucking out chirping again. Haven't heard him all day. Can you hear him?
I can hear him through the mic, yeah. Yeah, you can actually hear that.
This can't go on tonight. This can't go on tonight. I'm going to go and sleep in the spare room. I can't listen to him chirping. Do you see the way he's chirping now? That was 3:00 this morning, continuously, like a fucking. ADHD child.
You're right. You're gonna get some earplugs, man.
I have earplugs, but I tell you one thing, I might have to get a fucking chainsaw and cut that tree down. I'll bring his whole world down tonight. Right. Sorry, what was this guy's name? Stanislav
Petrov. So it's only a page long, so I'll give this a read. And okay, here we go. On the 26th of September, 1983, Stanislav Petrov made a calm decision under pressure, quite similar in nature to that of Arkhipov. A decision that also likely averted a catastrophic war. As the former, when you shared that there, my screen blew up. You keep blowing up my screen.
Oh, sorry. I'll turn it off for a minute. Sorry, please continue.
Oh, sorry. It's what it actually expands onto my screen.
Sorry.
It actually overrides anything else I have.
Sorry. I didn't know I was doing that. Sorry, go ahead.
As the former United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said, quote, "It is hard to imagine anything more devastating for humanity than all-out nuclear war between Russia and the United States. Yet this might have occurred by accident on September 26, 1983, were it not for the wise decisions of Stanislav Yevgrafovich Petrov. For this, he deserves humanity's profound gratitude. Let us resolve to work together to realize a world free from fear of nuclear weapons, remembering the courageous judgment of Stanislav Petrov," close quote. On that day in 1983, a report came in to Petrov of 5 incoming nuclear missiles. This occurred at a time of high tension between the two superpowers of the US and USSR, quote, due in part to the US military buildup in the early 1980s and President Ronald Reagan's anti-Soviet rhetoric, close quote, according to the Future of Life Institute. To provide more context to the tension, only earlier that month, the USSR shot down a Korean Airlines passenger plane which had strayed into its airspace. Petrov only had a few minutes to decide what to do with the news of the reported inbound missiles in terms of deciding whether to call in the detection, thereby most likely triggering retaliation, or to deem it to be a false alarm. In spite of the satellite being found to be working properly, however, he decided not to call in the report. He was calm enough to reason that if the US were going to launch an attack, they would fire more than just 5 missiles. And based on this measured hunch, he actually told his superiors that it was a false alarm before he actually knew for sure this was the case. Later, it turned out that his gut feeling had been correct. It had been reflections from the sun off of the clouds which had fooled the satellite into thinking missiles were incoming. The 2017 Nobel Prize laureate Beatrice Finn said of Petrov and the current state of nuclear proliferation, quote, "Stanislav Petrov was faced with a choice that no person should have to make. And at the moment he chose the human race to save us all. No one person and no one country should have that type of control over all our lives and all our future lives to come." 35 years from that day, when Stanislav Petrov chose us over nuclear weapons, 9 states still hold the world hostage with 15,000 nuclear weapons. We cannot continue on luck and heroes to safeguard humanity. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons provides an opportunity for all of us and our leaders to choose the human race over nuclear weapons by banning them and eliminating them once and for all. The choice is the end of us or the end of nuclear weapons. We honor Stanislav Petrov by choosing the latter. It is all too easy to argue that every human alive today owes a debt of gratitude to the calm heads of Vasily Arkhipov and Stanislav Petrov. This is both a terrifying realization and also an inspiring illustration of human goodness. These are, however, just 2 of the many near misses that we know about involving nuclear weapons. It also seems utterly insane that we should be relying on the right person being in the right place at the right time to avoid destroying humanity's future potential.
And reflections of the clouds.
Yeah.
How bananas is that? Can I share this? Can I share the screen to put a picture?
100%. Yeah. Sorry, what was happening there was when you clicked that in screen share, the Zoom would take over my whole fucking screen and it was blocking out the PDF. That's what it was.
This is Petrov here. He died in 2017 from cancer.
Yeah.
Maybe we need a picture of him above your door, not John F. Kennedy and Jesus. We need him because him and the other lad.
Petrov,
Jesus Christ, man. Fucking hell.
What a character, man. So he won the 2018. His family was awarded the 2018 Future of Life Award as well, which is where I came across him. As I said, the Future of Life Institute podcast is very good and their website's class. And and the fact that we hadn't heard about this fella either, like, you know.
There's a picture of him there when he was younger, and there's a picture of him getting the award. 35 years. You wonder how many of these cases, Kieran, are actually out there, like on both sides, USA, USR, you know, how many of these people that I suppose saw the light, for want of a better word, in the situation as opposed to the dark, because military is very good at hyping people up into this, you know. And you got to remember the Cold War, 1983, like this was going on now 30 odd years, like since the end of World War II. It wasn't like it was a new war. There were 30 odd years into this, and it was pretty well defined and who the enemy was and what was going on. And so,
and in the 1980s as well, so Beatrice Finn there, as I said, she won the Nobel Prize in 2017, but when so that was 83, 35 years later was 2018 when Petrov was given the Future of Life Award. But there was 15,000 nuclear weapons in 2018. There's about the same now, maybe slightly less, from my understanding. Whereas in 1983 there was 70,000. So there was way more, because that's even before they understood the implications of nuclear winter. Their awareness of nuclear weaponry was only the immediate destruction and the potential for nuclear fallout. They didn't understand the concept of nuclear winter. It was that year, 82, 83, that Alan Robock, Owen Toon, and Carl Sagan and these people actually discovered the concept of nuclear winter. So this was back in the day when they thought just about, like I mentioned in the last podcast, but it's worth reiterating, is this concept of mutually assured destruction. Is we won't shoot you because then you'll shoot us and then we die because we've just nuked each other. But it was as a result of the nuclear winter modeling that they realized, actually, even if one of us shoots the other one, we all still die anyway, because we can no longer grow any food and we all starve to death within a few months or whenever the food runs out. And it becomes like a Mad Max world, and you end up with just a few people along the equator or off the coast of New Zealand can grow spuds and do a bit of fishing. That's basically what you end up with. Everyone else dies, billions, within months, once everyone starves to death. Like, so that was only 1982, 83. And then that led to a kind of a de-escalation, or facilitated a de-escalation of nuclear weapons and disarmament, where it went from 70,000 at the peak of the Cold War, which is in the early 80s, in terms of weaponry, technological weaponry, mass, like thermonuclear weapons, in tens of thousands, down to what we now have as 14 or 15,000, which is still 100 times more than is needed to put nuclear winter on the world. Like the modeling from the likes of Alan Robock and Toon now basically is like, well, if India and Pakistan, who have like 150 odd weapons each, if they were to go at it, maybe one of them would only need to go at it if they hit enough cities, and then we still all fucking die all over the world anyway, because there's enough particulate matter put into the air just from nuking Indian cities or Pakistani cities. And not to mind if they go at each other and retaliate, not to mind if big countries go at each other, like Russia and the US, or Russia and the West, or Russia and whatever. So like, it only takes a small localized conflict to basically starve everyone else to death within a few months and create a dark, literally a new dark ages, and plunge the world into a new ice age. So, as a one last side note, you might resonate with this, is that the more I learn about this stuff, the more I realize that we haven't earned the right to prioritize global warming as the main existential risk problem we should be focusing on, because we have to earn the right to care about that to the same extent that we do. And it's not that we shouldn't care about climate change, but the fact that that's what gets all the attention, and Greta Thunberg, for all her positive traits, if she was able to point that energy at something like that nuclear proliferation, is way scarier, because this global warming crack is a slow cook, whereas nuclear winter, India and Pakistan could kick off in a half an hour's time, and then within an hour's time all the missiles are in the air, and within 6 months time, within 3 weeks time, people are starving to death and eating each other and cannibalism, and then within 6 months time there's a few people left that are growing spuds in New Zealand. So like, that's way scarier, but yet we're focused on climate change as if it's this key focus at the expense of way scarier problems.
Yeah, that's actually a really nice way of framing it, because you're right. If we were to Pareto chart all the things that could wipe out humanity, from the COVID conversation we had to global warming, really the number one thing on that Pareto chart and that distribution, the thing that could really absolutely fucking decimate us all, is nuclear weapons. So really, why are we focusing on climate change? Why are we focusing on COVID when we should just get rid of nuclear weapons first and foremost, and give ourselves the ability to keep going as a race first? Let's give ourselves the maximum opportunity by removing them. Now, the same argument would be like what we had about public health there. But you got to focus on all of these things. They're all worth doing. Yeah. It's the very same argument. 100%. Well, public health is multifactorial, multidisciplinary. We have to have a balanced approach. And I agree.
But it's about figuring out where to allot the resources
for the biggest risk
to the risk, and in terms of the gain acquired. So it's about figuring out, like, because we don't want to treat something like, there are existential risks like that are very low probability, but we know exist because, like, say for example, asteroids took out the dinosaurs. So we know that that happened, but the likelihood of it happening is very slim. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't care about it. So in the 1980s and 90s, they modeled and mapped all the large objects greater than a kilometer in diameter, I think, that are 99% of them that are potentially able to hit Earth have been mapped, and scientists know where they are. But so it's not that, but it's like, okay, that's important, but the probability of that in terms of risk probabilities, that's way lower, and it's good that we focus on it. And it was important, but once they realized what the thing was that killed the dinosaurs in the early 1980s, that actually fed into the climate modeling. That actually was an influence when they discovered what it was that took out the dinosaurs, the asteroidal impact. That actually facilitated the climate modeling that resulted around nuclear winter. So it's about not optimizing for nuclear warfare and then all of a sudden letting the other things run rampant. It's being aware of, okay, given the risk profile, where should energy and resources be devoted relative to the positive impact it's going to have? And the amount of resources and energy should be totally rationally allotted toward what will acquire the most amount of return on investment, rather than focusing on just what has the most amount of emotional impact. Like, you could look at it from like a effective altruism perspective, where the likes of Sam Harris often talks about one of the most unsexy yet beneficial things that can be done for humanity is to mitigate malaria. So like things like mosquito nets, the provision of mosquito nets to people is one of the best ways of mitigating malaria, so people can sleep and decrease the chance of getting malaria from the mosquitoes. But it's so unsexy, and whereas it can actually do the most amount, potentially one of the most amount of good. And but this is Harris's kind of riff. Whereas if you look at something like, and this isn't to say that breast cancer research and breast cancer charities shouldn't receive support and funding, etc., and attention, but where's the most amount of benefit going to be conferred on humanity for the same amount of money, let's say, and energy? Is it on breast cancer research, or is it your breast cancer research should be conferred the same amount of energy that's going to acquire a benefit proportional to what could be gained from the same amount of money put elsewhere? So it's like, figuring out how to allot resources relative to the return on investment.
The value proposition.
So something like, so that's where I get kind of confused and somewhat frustrated when I see this hyper focus on climate change all the time, even when we're in the midst of a pandemic, and a lack of focus on even pandemics, like engineered pandemics, the fact that there's so little focus on the risks that come from legitimately dangerous pandemics. You know, ones like, there was a gain of function research done in 2011 by 2 labs, one in Wisconsin and one in the Netherlands. And I think Fouchier was the researcher, Ron Fouchier was the fella in the Netherlands. But they took the H5N1 bird flu and they did gain of function serial transmission with, I can't remember, was it weasels or something that they did it with? And basically took this virus that wasn't transmissible between mammals and made it transmissible between mammals. But the thing about this virus was it has a 60% mortality rate. So they basically summoned a demon into existence that maybe nature never could have come up with. So this thing existed, and it generated a whole discussion around gain of function research. And then you had research, there's a guy called Lipsitch, I think his name was, in Harvard, who I think was involved in leading a letter to try and get the government in the US to stop funding gain of function research in this area because it was so dangerous. And then eventually it did get taken down by the Obama administration. And in 2017, the Trump administration, someone in the Trump administration, somehow, whether it was, I don't know what the circumstances were, managed to reignite it and get funding back going again. And into this whole, the American provision of funding for this gain of function research stuff. But there are the potential for weaponization of viruses and everything. So it's like, we're not that far away even from, you know, like there was the stabbing, let's say, by that lad in New Zealand. He stabbed a lot of people in a shopping center. Was it last week?
Yeah. So the other thing I meant to say to you earlier on that. So New Zealand is a 7 to 8 hour flight from where we are. And with that grand final happening here in Western Australia, the Australian rules football, generally before the grand final, they have a parade of like the players on the back of trucks or whatever goes on in Melbourne. And they're going to replicate that here. Because of what happened in New Zealand, 7 or 8 hour flight away, the risk is too high to have it here in case we have a terrorist attack. So
why would you even put that out there in the zeitgeist as an option? Because why would you even mention that?
Because I think this is playing into the whole thing, Kieran, here is about this whole
feeding into the fear
generation of fear and threat, and we'll keep you safe. So we're going to have the parade inside the stadium going around in a circle, like the fucking Duffy's treating circus.
That was a lone lad who went away with a knife and stabbed people. Like that wasn't like.
Yeah, I know.
So it's, man. So like, but the thing is, right, we're not that far away technologically from the likes of that fella, or like Omar Mateen, who murdered 49 people in a gay bar and injured 53 more in 2016 in the US in Florida.
Yeah.
And he went into this Islamist lad in Orlando and went in and murdered all these people. Or that other fella, Brent or whatever his name was, Tarrant or whatever he was, the fella who shot up the mosques in New Zealand, the likes of him. Like, we're not that far away technologically from the likes of one of those two lads. Like, let's say that Omar Mateen lad who wanted to hurt gay people, being able to send packages of fucking smallpox to San Francisco Gay Pride Parade and during Gay Pride. Or that Brent Tarrant or whatever his name was in New Zealand, being able, if he wants to hurt Muslims, being able to, during Hajj in Saudi Arabia, send packages of smallpox or anthrax or whatever to Saudi Arabia during Hajj, that he can make at home in his basement using potentially commercially available equipment that you don't need to be a technical person to be able to use within the next decade or whatever, within the next few years even. Because we're at a stage now where technology is increasing so fast, the technological capacity for destruction, for force multiplication. So if I have a fist, I can do a certain amount of damage. If I have a rock in my hand, I can do a certain amount of damage. If I have a sword or a hatchet in my hand, I can do a bit more damage. If I have a gun, if I have a rocket launcher, if I have the ability to push a button, like, these are all modalities of multiplying force. So like the force multiplication capacity, even on lone wolf actors, is increasing so fast that we're losing. So it's on us as a populace to figure out how to live such that we don't have people that want to be lone wolf killers, because we're gone past this, because we're not that far away, where these fellas luckily only had, like this fella only had a knife, whereas Omar Martin had machine gun, and so did your man had some guns, and the other fella had guns as well, the fella in UK or in New Zealand. But we're not that far away from where these guys are going to be able to make really powerful explosives, or be able to make biological weapons and print anthrax in their living room, you know, and send, like, that's not that far. Like, that's only a few years away, because there's things like CRISPR gene editing and these means of printing. Like, who knows what we're going to end up going to be developing with 3D printing situations. So, like, this is what interests me so much with this crack, is like, our technological capacity for destruction and mayhem is increasing at this exponential rate.
Yeah.
But we're not developing commensurate love and wisdom to ensure that we don't destroy ourselves. So we're eventually, like, I wrote in that essay that I ended up sending to you, was that, like, where we have these all too evident capacities for violence and mayhem and hatred that make us look like cocaine demented chimpanzees, but we have the destructive capacity of mythological deities.
Yeah.
And that asymmetry is only increasing. Like, and this is what's kind of so concerning, is that there's these big picture issues around geopolitics and big nation conflict, and Russia and the West and China and India and Pakistan, etc. And there's all these things. But then there's also just the capacity for lone individuals to be able to do a lot more harm than they could with a machine gun or a bomb, that they could potentially go from a school shooter to a school plaguer. These are the kind of scenarios that we're also facing. Not to mind other technological things for technically minded people, like the ability to crash servers or interfere with aviation stuff so that planes crash, or to be able to do destructive malware attacks on government infrastructure so that health systems can't work, etc., like happened here in the HSE ransom here, like these tech ransomers, basically tech pirates. I don't know what you call them.
You know what's interesting, Kieran, about some of these things you're saying is number one is that I think you're talking about this growth of these technologies, and I think what's happening is we're not cultivating love, compassion, and wisdom. I think what we're doing is becoming more divisive. We're becoming more polarized. It's not actually fostering unity. It's fostering some unity, but it's fostering opposing unity. That's what I think. I think we're just getting more and more fractured as a society, or societies, or a global society. And the other thing is, then, based upon your comments around nuclear weapons and so on, or the lone wolves and so on, I'm so glad we did Becker's work at the start of this podcast, because without having Becker's work as the segue to this work that we do on this podcast, and I call it work because I think independently of whoever's listening, you and I are working through these things. I view this as like it's like work for me. It's working through in a fun way of these kind of questions that I have in a safe space, as they say, right? And I think what's the good thing about doing that is I've realized that lots of things is, you talk about weakness earlier on another podcast, weakness and fear of death, and the inability to accept that death is going to happen. And this kind of immortality complex that I've been talking about with COVID, people have this idea they're going to live forever. And so what this is all kind of laid out in front of me right now, with maybe the 6-7 examples you've said, is that we can't control anything. You could be sitting here in your house, you could be worrying about what you got to do tomorrow. You got to feed the kids, you got to pay the mortgage, you got to get the car serviced, you got to do that charity 5K on the weekend, and the fucking roof is leaking, you got to get the house painted, you got to go and see your mother on the weekend, and your 4-year-old sick, and blah, blah, blah. But like you said, like that, Pakistan and India can kick off, and boom, that all means fucking nothing. And you've got zero control over any of that stuff. You've got zero control over that. You got zero control over government policies. Zero. That can be just on you like that. Because you might have voted in the government 2 years ago because you thought they were great, and then something happens like a COVID or a nuclear war or a war, and then bang, another policy comes in that you don't know about. So we have absolutely fucking no control, which is great, because at least now we know where we stand. We're all going to die. We don't know when. We have no control. So when you wake up tomorrow morning, put your hands between your legs, grab it, and go out there and do something good.
Yeah.
Because who knows when it's going to be your last day.
But in that, what is under control, even though we can't control the outside world, there's actually something really empowering about realizing what is within our control is how we bring ourselves to the world.
Yes. I fully agree with that.
Yeah. So we can control how we bring ourselves to it. And there's a beautiful line by, there's actually a book here. I'm reading this next, Interdependence, it's called.
I've seen that. That's a lady, something Sharma, is it?
Sharma.
Yeah, I've seen that
Sharma.
around. Yeah, I think I saw her on a podcast. Or
yeah, I mean, I never actually heard an interview with her, but it seems like it's a beautiful book. Like I heard
was she on Russell Brand recently, maybe? No,
maybe.
I don't know.
It seems a beautiful. Like I heard it was Ian McGilchrist mentioned it in another interview somewhere, and it just resonated with me big time when he described what it was about. And I bought it, and it's absolutely savage. But I put a few quotes on the inside of it that I wrote, and this is a line from a little kind of a bit of prose / mini essay in a book called Consolations by David White, who's a British poet. He said, "We are shaped by our shaping of the world and are shaped again in turn. The way we face the world alters the face we see in the world. The way we face the world alters the face we see in the world." We're like, we can bring we bring ourselves to the world, and that alters the world we see on the other side. And I think by really recognizing what is within control and what is within our capacity to influence, which is essentially fuck all, but in the outside world, but what is from within us, we alter how we see the world. Like we discussed in a previous episode, like people who are causing us aggro, and like you mentioned there a minute ago, people who are acting as pricks and being malevolent or seemingly malevolent. It's up to us if we hate them and hate them back and then perpetuate that cycle of hatred. Or this isn't to advocate pacifism and just let people do whatever to us and just accept everything, and just be walked all over. But it's to, even if we act from a place of compassion, that even if we have to. Do you ever see the movie Avatar?
Yeah.
Do you ever see there's a part of that movie towards the start where your man is a bit goofy in the new body and he gets separated from the other troops?
Yeah.
And he's getting attacked at night by these jaguar-looking dog things. These like black, slick, oily-looking, multi-headed jaguar dogs or whatever in the jungle. And he's just about to get wiped out. And then the lady jumps out and saves him and fights him off.
Yeah.
And the lady avatar, and she fights him off, and she's fucking ferocious, kicks the shit out of him, kills one of them, kicks the shit out of the rest of them, and they all take off. And she's ferocious. But then as soon as the fight's over, she's full of compassion and sorrow for having had to have killed one of them. So that kind of mentality of being able to act and do what we do the right thing. I'm not taking saying to kill people, but the fact that she was actually acting from a place of compassion.
Yeah.
But it just so happened that she did this. This is a thing that she didn't want to do, but needed to be done to be able to save this person. And I'm not advocating by any means killing people, but it's that kind of frame of mind to not be a pacifist, but to be acting from a place of compassion rather than hatred.
But I think the underlying thing about Avatar as well, if you look at it from more of a philosophical point of view, is that the world that they lived in Avatar, I can't remember what the name of that planet was, but
Pandora,
yeah. Pandora, was it? Yeah, it was.
Is it Pandora?
I think so. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe it is. Anyway, whatever the fuck, Avatar world, whatever the fuck it's called, right? There was also an underlying philosophy there of interdependence, like you just spoke about. There was also panpsychism there as well, that everything was alive. So there was, and you could see that when they went hunting as well. There was that kind of, giving thanks to the animal after she took the took the life of the animal and talked sport. That was very much a central theme in that movie. Probably around the middle of the movie that was there. There was obviously his kind of nearly hero's journey using Joseph Campbell, coming from a place of, being disabled or, whatever, and then going on this journey and being separated and then, finding himself and finding who he really was and his inner being. And then in this new body, nearly like being reborn, elements of kind of Jesus in there as well. And then comes back. And Avatar was my litmus test for intelligence, because when people would say to me, "Oh, Avatar, there was no fucking story in that," I used to laugh and think, "Well, you're a moron," because there was multiple stories. There was multiple storylines going on that. It's true though, isn't it? I remember one guy said to me, "Oh, Avatar is because it was shite. There was no real story to it." I just went, "You're a fucking moron," and walked away from it. Because that was multi-level. That was multi-level. I went to watch that 3 times in the movies. My wife was away, and I went to watch it on my own one Sunday. I was like, "Oh, Avatar, everybody's raving for that. I'll go and watch it." I was down there, and I think I went down and did like a big run in the morning. I was like, "I'll go there now," and just shoved my head full of fucking popcorn and chocolate. I went down, and I messaged my missus straight away, "You got to watch this." Then the following weekend, I went back and watched it with her, and then I went back and watched it again on my own another time. I never watched, and it wasn't that I was like this. It was more I had to go back watching it for the story of like the underlying philosophies in it, because there was lots of stuff in there about climate change, mining, sustainable development, panpsychism, interdependence. There's obviously a love story in there. There's the hero's journey. There's the being true to yourself, following your journey, free will, no free will. We're all on a destined path. Maybe you're not of this world, you're of that world. Like there's all those things in it that's so multi-layered. Fuck it, I might watch it again tonight, actually. Interesting bit of trivia though, Kieran. That main actor is actually from here in Perth, Sam Worthington. He's from the very same suburb that our premier of the state lives in, Rockingham. I was on the same flight as him one time going from Sydney to Los Angeles. And he was in front of me in the queue going through immigration in the US. And the guy goes, "And occupation, what are you here for? Business? Business. What do you do?" "I'm an actor." "Oh, really? Where?" He goes, "Hollywood." "Oh, you're the guy of Avatar," he goes.
Yeah.
And he went through.
As a side note, I think the Jack Reacher movies that Tom Cruise was in.
Was only one of them, wasn't there? Was there more?
There was 2 or 3 of them, I think. There was at least 2 anyway.
Really?
Jack Reacher.
I thought there was only 1.
Yeah. No, I always thought that your man Sam Worthington would have made a much better Reacher than Tom Cruise, because I read a load of the Reacher books, like 15 of them, 20 of them. I don't even know how many. I read at least a dozen, if not 15 or more, of the Reacher books. There's fucking loads of them. And I thought that your man Sam Worthington would have been a great Jack Reacher, just because of the Reacher in the book versus the Reacher that Tom Cruise lived was a bit different, to say the least, or acted out. But
there's only one, man.
No, there's one called Jack Reacher, and there's another one that's also a Jack Reacher movie, but it's called Never Go Back or something.
And has that got Tom Cruise now?
Yeah, there's 2 Tom Cruise Jack Reacher movies. There's one that's just called Jack Reacher, I think, and another one that's called Never Go Back.
Could
you see? Am I right?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. And which one came out first?
Just the Jack Reacher one.
Never Go Back.
Yeah.
I don't even remember seeing that,
Yeah, it involves some like framing of someone gets framed or something, and then there's a lady character in it that he ends up going back to help, something like that, if I remember correctly. I haven't seen it now in years. But I thought he was a class Terminator as well. Your man Sam Worthington was in Terminator when he was Christian Bale.
Yeah.
I fucking love that.
Yeah. All right, man, we're going to wrap it up there. Before we go, I just wanted to do a shout out of a newsletter. This is on the History Channel. You can subscribe to a newsletter that comes out every day, and it tells you on this day what happened. Do you want to hear a couple of facts that happened today?
Yeah, go on.
On this day in 1776, the world's first submarine attack occurred. 1776, world's first submarine attack.
What?
Yeah, 1776. Did you know? Here's one for you. Did you know who started the Argentinian Navy?
No.
It was a guy from Ireland.
Yeah, for some reason I was thinking it had to do with an Irish fella. Yeah.
Yeah, he's buried up in Mayo.
Yeah, my uncle mentioned him 2 weeks ago, and I was chatting to him down in West Cork. My uncle mentioned him.
Yeah.
The Irish fella that started the Navy, because my uncle was involved with I don't know what you call it, shipping, basically. Yeah, shipping for decades. And he mentioned him. Yeah.
There was speaking of his name was William Brown, Admiral William Brown. He founded. I have a book called Paseaños I read there a few years ago. It's about Irish people. Paseaños means like countrymen in Spanish. And it was about Irish influence in South America. But this guy, William Brown, was out of favour and then back in favour. I think he was in jail for a while. He's from Foxford. He died in Buenos Aires. No, he's actually buried in Buenos Aires. I don't know where I'm getting mixed up. Oh, the Argentinian. This ring I mixed up. The Argentinian ambassador died in Ireland during COVID, and they were buried in Mayo. That's what I'm getting mixed up with. Anyway, back to the newsletter. Oh, the other thing, did you know that the submarine, the torpedo, was developed by an Irish person, or the propeller on the torpedo? Did you know that?
No.
Yeah, I remember reading this a few years ago. I just got useless trivia. Developed by, let me get the name. It's an Irish person anyway. I don't think it was the actual torpedo itself. It was the propelling system, I think. Can't find his name off the top of my head. And did you know that the White House was developed by an Irishman?
No.
Yeah. His name, White House. James Hoban. The story of James Hoban, the Irishman who built the White House. When James Hoban moved to Washington, he was born in County Kilkenny. Then he went to America, became an architect in 1785, emigrated to Philadelphia to seek out success. Then he went to South Carolina. Yeah, he designed the White House. He was an architect. We're like fucking rats, we are, aren't we? We're everywhere. Anyway, here's another one for you. On this day in 1996, Tupac Shakur is shot. And on this day in 1977, the US agrees to transfer Panama Canal to Panama. And on this day in 1940, the Blitz begins as Germany bombs London.
I was thinking World War II. That's what I was, yeah.
Yeah.
I was thinking, all right, yeah.
There's a few things that are happening. With that, Kieran, we shall say goodbye.
Class.